He smirked at the stunned crowd, his voice dripping with mockery. "Any wife for free, you say? Then I choose her, the Amish seamstress with flour on her dress and shame in her eyes." Laughter roared. But in that single moment, Miriam Stoltzfus's life collided with Cassian Rourke's, a cruel joke that neither could escape, and a choice that would strip them both bare. Would you ever accept love if it began as a mockery, or would you walk away fast? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, as this story may just change your mind.
Hello, if you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tap the notification bell. Type in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as touching as this one, or maybe even crazier. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin.
Cassian Rourke, Portland, Oregon. The conference room gleamed with steel, glass, and sterile perfection. Cassian Rourke sat at the head of the table, his posture too effortless, too commanding, as if he owned not just the room, but every breath inside it. Which, in truth, he did. His empire, Rourke Enterprises, had hands in shipping, tech, even luxury real estate. Billionaire by 32, widower by 33, legend and enigma by 34. And yet, beneath the tailored Armani and biting wit, Cassian carried silence like a shadow. His assistant, Leonie Groth, leaned in. "Victor Hanley is pushing again. He says your bachelor status is bad for business. Investors prefer family men." Cassian's lips twisted. "Ah, yes. Nothing says stability like a gold-digger bride on your arm." Leonie hesitated. "Hanley's hosting his annual gala in Lancaster this weekend. The one where he makes his offers." Cassian raised a brow. "Offers?" Leonie flushed. "You know his game. He parades women like prizes. Choose any wife for free, he likes to say. A grotesque spectacle." Cassian let out a short, cold laugh. "A carnival for desperate men. Charming." His eyes darkened. "Perhaps I will attend." He told himself it was to mock Hanley, but the truth, Cassian hadn't felt anything in years, except when cutting someone down. Miriam Stoltzfus, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The morning air smelled of fresh earth and wood smoke. Miriam Stoltzfus bent over a quilt spread across her lap, the pattern of stars and vines taking shape under her calloused hands. At 29, she was already considered a spinster by Amish standards. Her family loved her, yes, but she knew the whispers. Too big, too quiet, too strange in her head. She carried her weight like a wall, pretending she didn't hear when children snickered behind her back, or when young men chose slimmer girls at barn dances. Her younger brother, Jonas, entered the room. "Miriam, Hanley's gala is tonight. He invited the families again. He says he may have matches." Miriam smiled faintly, though it trembled. "Jonas, no one there is looking for me." Jonas crouched beside her, his hand on hers. "Maybe it's time someone did." Her heart stung. She wanted to believe him, but she knew better. Cassian's jet touched down in Lancaster that afternoon, his mind sharpening with a predator's amusement. Hanley's gala was infamous, a marketplace of vanity. For Cassian, it was entertainment. For Hanley, it was power. By dusk, lanterns glowed against the night as men in tailored suits mingled with Amish families, drawn by curiosity, hope, or desperation. Miriam stood near the edge of the hall, her plain blue dress blending into shadows. She had come only because Jonas insisted. Cassian, towering in his dark suit, cut through the crowd like a blade. He spotted Hanley, who spread his arms wide. "Rourke, at last! Tonight you may choose any wife for free." The crowd laughed. Cassian's smirk deepened. His eyes flicked, faces painted with hunger, hope, fear. And then, her. Miriam, clutching her quilt bag like armor, cheeks flushed, eyes downcast. She looked wildly out of place, painfully human. Cassian's chest tightened, not with desire, but with something he refused to name. He raised his glass, his voice loud, mocking. "Then I choose her, the Amish seamstress, the one no one else dares to look at." Laughter exploded. Miriam froze, every cruel whisper of her life echoing back. Jonas's hand clenched at his side. Cassian only smirked deeper, but something in his gut twisted when Miriam finally lifted her eyes to his. They weren't meek. They weren't broken. They were steady. Wounded, yes, but unflinching. And for the first time in years, Cassian felt small. If you were Miriam, would you have walked away that night or stayed to face the man who mocked you? Comment below. I'm curious what your heart would choose.
The laughter didn't die quickly. It roared, rolled, and echoed off the high wooden beams of the gala hall. Miriam stood rigid, quilt bag pressed against her chest, heat rising into her cheeks until it felt like her skin might split. Every whispered word she'd ever overheard about her body, every sideways glance, every dismissal, Cassian Rourke had distilled them into one public strike, and everyone else had sharpened it with their laughter. Jonas shifted protectively, stepping half a pace in front of her. "You don't have to stay here," he murmured. His voice was soft, urgent, trying to shield her from humiliation. But Miriam's eyes remained locked on the man who had named her, Cassian Rourke. He stood effortlessly confident, dark suit catching the light, glass of champagne tilted loosely in his hand. His smirk hadn't faltered, but his eyes, they flickered. Something unsettled lived in them. She caught it, just for a moment, and it made her spine stiffen. Victor Handley, relishing the spectacle, clapped his hands. "Well, well, a bold choice, Rourke. I knew you'd surprise us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some mocking, some scandalized, a few even pitying. The Amish families exchanged wary glances, some scandalized at Miriam being dragged into the glare, others whispering that perhaps it was her chance. Cassian tipped his glass lazily. "A man must keep life interesting, mustn't he?" His tone was pure mockery, but his gaze didn't leave Miriam's. Miriam felt her stomach churn, but she refused to drop her eyes. She had spent her life shrinking, apologizing for existing, absorbing other people's laughter as though she deserved it. Not tonight, not before this man who thought she was an easy punchline. She took one step forward, and the room hushed as if a thread had snapped. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I am not a prize to be chosen for free." Cassian blinked. The words struck sharper than he expected. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy between them. Handley's grin faltered before returning wider, trying to cover the tension. "Oh, a spirited one! Rourke, you'll have your hands full." Miriam turned, clutching her bag tighter, ready to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to curl into the safe silence of home. But her chest burned, and something inside her refused to bend beneath their ridicule. Cassian's smirk faltered as he watched her retreat. He told himself it was amusement, that he didn't care whether she walked out or burst into tears. But his jaw clenched involuntarily, teeth grinding. He hadn't expected defiance. He hadn't expected eyes that could cut through all his armor. Leonie's voice brushed his ear from behind. "That was cruel, Cassian, even for you." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Outside, the night air wrapped around Miriam like a balm, but the wound inside throbbed hotter than ever. Jonas caught her arm. "Miriam, wait! Don't let them—" "I'm fine," she said sharply, surprising them both. Her voice softened. "I just need to go home." Jonas's expression was heavy, torn between rage at Cassian and helplessness for his sister. He nodded, guiding her toward their wagon. But Miriam's hands trembled the entire way, and in her chest, something new had rooted itself. Anger. Not just at Cassian, but at herself, for nearly believing she wasn't worth more. Inside the hall, Cassian downed his champagne in one swallow, though it burned bitter. Handley laughed beside him, slapping his shoulder. "Brilliant, Rourke! No one will forget that!" Cassian's eyes flicked toward the door where Miriam had disappeared. No one will forget, that is true, but he would remember her eyes most of all, steady, wounded, unyielding. He told himself it was irritation that gnawed at him, but deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The rest of the night passed in a blur of meaningless conversation and shallow laughter, yet Cassian felt strangely hollow, as if something vital had been left unfinished. For the first time in years, he felt the sharp edge of shame. Miriam sat by her window that night, quilt across her lap, hands still. She stared at the moonlight spilling across the fields, her chest heavy with humiliation. But beneath it, another truth simmered. She hadn't broken. He had tried to make her small, and still she had spoken. That mattered, even if no one else cared. And somewhere across the city, Cassian lay awake in his penthouse suite, staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice replay in his mind. Not meek, not broken, just steady and unwilling to be anyone's joke. For both of them, that night's cruel spark would not fade. It had lit something neither of them could extinguish.
Cassian told himself it was ridiculous. He had mocked a stranger, an Amish woman who had no place in his world, and she had given him a defiant answer. That was all. Yet by morning, her voice still rattled in his mind. I am not a prize to be chosen for free. He stood at the window of his Portland penthouse, watching the sun rise across the city skyline, and hated the unease in his chest. He threw himself into work that day, into meetings, contracts, and negotiations, speaking with his usual clipped brilliance, but his temper was short. Leonie noticed it. At one point she asked him, carefully, "Is something bothering you?" Cassian didn't answer. He didn't dare explain that a woman he'd tried to humiliate had unsettled him more than any billion-dollar deal. Meanwhile, Lancaster hummed with whispers. Miriam could feel them pressing against her wherever she went, the butcher lowering his voice when she walked past, the baker exchanging knowing glances with his wife. It wasn't just her size anymore. It was the scandal of being named by Cassian Rourke in front of everyone. A man from another world had chosen her, if only to mock, and now she carried the weight of that spectacle. Her mother spoke gently that evening as Miriam stitched in silence. People will talk, child, but you mustn't let their words become your chains. Miriam nodded, but her hands trembled. The truth was, she wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink back into the quiet, unseen corners of life. And yet there was another part of her that burned with the memory of standing her ground, of meeting Cassian's eyes and refusing to be crushed. Jonas paced the kitchen, restless. He doesn't get to walk away after what he did, not after humiliating you like that. Miriam's voice was quiet. Let him walk away. Let him forget. But she didn't believe he would. And Cassian didn't. He resisted it with every ounce of his pride. He booked flights, scheduled trips, chased the noise of his empire. Yet in the silence of his nights, he found himself replaying her face. Her refusal had stripped him, left him exposed in a way he despised. He went back to Handley within the week, sneering as he poured himself a drink. Quite the show you put on, Handley said with a smirk. You humiliated the girl and made yourself the center of every conversation. You've won again. Cassian's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way Handley said humiliated. He didn't like imagining Miriam as some crushed insect under his heel. Forget her, Handley continued. She's no one, just a distraction. Cassian nodded curtly, but when he left the room, his chest felt heavy. Miriam, on the other hand, buried herself in work. Quilts piled higher, each stitch a distraction. She tended the garden, milked the cows, baked bread until her hands ached. Yet every time she looked into the mirror, she heard echoes of that laughter. And every time she remembered it, she remembered, too, how Cassian's expression had faltered. Not much, but enough. Two people on opposite coasts, both pretending to push the other from memory, both failing. Jonas eventually confronted her. Why are you letting him live rent-free in your mind? She didn't answer, but she knew, because something had shifted in her. For once, she wasn't only the butt of laughter. She had stood, she had spoken, and maybe, just maybe, that was what frightened her most, how alive she had felt in that moment, even under cruelty. Cassian in his cold glass tower tried to smother the same spark with arrogance. He told himself she was beneath him, that she was no more than a curiosity.
But beneath the denial, shame aided him, twisting slowly, forcing him to admit that he hadn't just seen a joke that night, he had seen a woman he couldn't dismiss. And so they resisted. She resisted believing she could matter. He resisted admitting he had been wrong. Both clung to the safety of their walls, even as those walls began, imperceptibly, to crack.
Cassian hadn't planned to return to Lancaster. He told himself he had no reason to. Yet 2 weeks after the gala, he was there again, stepping out of a sleek black car that looked wildly out of place against horse-drawn buggies and dirt roads. He told himself it was business, some trivial matter with Hanley. But the truth simmered beneath his denial. He wanted to see her again. Miriam heard about his return before she saw him. Word traveled fast in a small community, and by the time the sun dipped low, her stomach was tight. She wanted to avoid him, to stay tucked inside the safety of her family's farmhouse. But fate, or mischief, had other plans. Jonas had injured his arm that morning, a deep gash from farm equipment. By nightfall, the bleeding hadn't slowed. Miriam bundled him into their wagon, guiding the horse toward the only clinic nearby. Her hands shook as she held the reins, whispering prayers under her breath. Inside the clinic, fluorescent lights hummed, and there he was, Cassian Rourke, leaning against the counter, speaking with the receptionist. He turned at the sound of her voice, and the room seemed to still. Miriam froze, quilt bag clutched tight as if it were armor. Jonas groaned, pulling her back to reality. "I need help," she said quickly, guiding her brother toward a chair. Cassian's eyes followed her. For the first time, there was no smirk on his lips, only something quiet, something unsettled. Minutes passed. The nurse whisked Jonas into a room, leaving Miriam in the waiting area. Cassian remained where he was, and silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Finally, he spoke. "Your brother, he'll be all right?" Miriam's eyes flicked to him. Surprise softened her expression for just a moment before she guarded it again. "The doctor said he'll be fine. He needs rest." Silence again. Outside, crickets chirped in the September air. Inside, the hum of machines filled the void. Cassian's gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly around the quilt bag. "You sew?" Miriam blinked. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "My mother used to." Before his words stopped abruptly, as if he had touched a wound too deep. Her lips parted, but she didn't press. She only looked at him, and he shifted beneath the weight of her gaze. When Jonas returned, bandaged and pale, Miriam stood quickly, ready to leave. But Cassian rose too. He surprised himself when he said, "Let me drive you home." She stiffened. "We have our wagon." "I insist," he said, softer than he meant to. Jonas glanced between them, curiosity flickering in his eyes, but his injury left him too weary to argue. With hesitation, Miriam agreed. The ride back was quiet, the hum of Cassian's car foreign against the silence of the fields. Miriam kept her eyes on the road, but Cassian stole glances at her profile, the way her jaw tightened, the way her hands folded in her lap as if bracing for attack. Finally, he spoke. "What I did that night, it wasn't fair." Her breath caught. She turned toward him slowly. "It wasn't just unfair, it was cruel." His grip tightened on the wheel. "You're right." The admission startled her. She expected denial, another smirk. Instead, she found something raw in his eyes, something she hadn't expected from a man like him. They reached the farmhouse, and Miriam climbed out quickly, helping Jonas from the car. She paused, quilt bag against her chest, and looked back at Cassian. For the first time, there was no laughter between them, only an uneasy closeness neither could escape. The farmhouse creaked with familiar warmth.
the smell of baked bread lingering from supper. Jonas slept upstairs, his bandaged arm propped with pillows. Miriam sat at the kitchen table, needle in hand, though the quilt across her lap blurred with every stitch. Her mind replayed the car ride, the quiet in Cassian's voice, the way he had admitted cruelty as though it were a confession dragged unwilling from his chest. She shook her head, forcing the thought away. Cassian Rourke belonged to another world. Whatever had passed between them at the clinic was nothing but coincidence. Yet the following afternoon his car appeared again on the gravel drive. Miriam froze at the window. Jonas, resting in a chair with his injured arm, raised a brow. "Are you going to send him away?" Her pulse thudded. "Yes," she said quickly, though her feet didn't move. Cassian knocked, and the sound rattled her bones. She opened the door just enough to meet his eyes. He looked different. No suit tonight, just a dark shirt and trousers, still sharp, still commanding, but something softer edged his expression. "I came to see if your brother needed anything." Miriam's lips pressed tight. "He needs rest, not your pity." Jonas chuckled behind her. "Let him in, Miriam. I'll decide if I need pity." Reluctantly, she opened the door wider. Cassian stepped inside, his presence filling the small kitchen. The house suddenly felt too narrow, too intimate. Jonas gestured with his good arm. "Sit. Miriam makes the best apple pie in Lancaster, though she'll never admit it." Miriam's cheeks warmed. She busied herself with plates, refusing to look at Cassian, but she could feel his gaze like heat against her back. They ate in near silence until Jonas asked, almost casually, "Tell me, Mr. Rourke, what drives a man to come back here after mocking my sister in front of half the county?" Miriam's breath caught, needle freezing in her hand. Cassian set down his fork slowly. His eyes met Jonas's, then Miriam's. For once, no smirk curved his lips. "Because I was wrong. And because I couldn't forget the way she looked at me when she said it." Miriam's chest tightened. She wanted to be angry, to call him out, but curiosity tugged harder. "And what about your story, Mr. Rourke? Do you make a habit of humiliating women to cover whatever's hiding underneath?" The words slipped out sharper than she intended. The kitchen went still. Cassian's jaw clenched, but he didn't deflect. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I was once married." The admission hung heavy in the room. Jonas sat up straighter, and Miriam's hands stilled entirely. "She was everything the world thought I needed. Elegant, beautiful, perfect for the cameras. But she didn't love me. She loved my name, my money. When she left," his voice faltered, roughened, "she didn't just leave. She burned every piece of me she could. Told me I was a fool, that no one would ever stay by choice, only by what I could buy." Silence blanketed the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of the old clock. Miriam's throat tightened. She understood in a way she hadn't expected. The laughter, the cruelty, his armor. She knew armor. She wore it every day in her silence, and the way she made herself small to avoid notice. Jonas's expression softened. He shifted, wincing at his arm. "So you lash out first, before anyone can wound you again?" Cassian's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Miriam. His voice was low. "Something like that." Miriam wanted to look away, to harden herself against him, but the truth pressed closer. He wasn't just the man who mocked her. He was a man who had been broken, who had chosen cruelty because it was safer than hope. And beneath her anger, she felt something dangerous. Understanding. Cassian rose after a while, thanking Jonas for the meal. At the door he paused, meeting Miriam's eyes. "You were right that night. You're not a prize. You're more than that." Her breath caught, but before she could reply, he stepped into the night, leaving her heart trembling in the quiet.
The days slipped into a strange rhythm. Cassian visited again, though he never announced himself. Sometimes he brought supplies for Jonas, other times books Miriam hadn't dared open in years, claiming they were just lying around his library. At first she bristled at the intrusion, but slowly his presence began to feel less like an invasion and more like something she couldn't name. One late afternoon, she found him outside in the garden, sleeves rolled clumsily, trying to pull weeds. His polished shoes were caked with soil, his hair mussed by the wind. Miriam stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unable to hold back a laugh. "You're doing it wrong," she said, stepping toward him. Cassian glanced up, scowling half-heartedly. "They're weeds. How can there be a wrong way?" She crouched beside him, her hands practiced and sure. "If you rip them this way, they come back twice as strong. You have to get the root." She tugged deftly, showing him. Cassian watched her hands, calloused but gentle, her hair slipping loose from its bun. For once, there was no mocking retort, only quiet admiration. "You make it look easy," he murmured. She didn't look up. Years of practice. Silence lingered, warm this time. He reached for another weed, imitating her, and when he failed, she laughed again. Something shifted between them. Lighter, softer. A space where laughter wasn't cruel, but shared. That evening, as the sun dipped gold across the fields, Miriam brought out a quilt she had finished. Cassian sat with her on the porch, the fabric spread across their knees. "My grandmother taught me when I was 5. Every piece tells a story. Pain, joy, hope, all sewn together." Cassian's gaze lingered on the quilt, then lifted to her face. "And what story is this one?" Miriam hesitated, then whispered, "Loneliness and waiting." The honesty struck him like a blade. He swallowed hard, his own walls cracking. "I know that story too well." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the air felt fragile, electric. Neither looked away. Jonas interrupted, calling from inside, and the spell broke. But that night, Cassian didn't leave immediately. He stayed on the porch with Miriam, speaking quietly about books, about the world beyond Lancaster. He asked about her childhood, and for the first time, she shared pieces of herself, small, careful, but real. When he finally rose to go, he paused at the door. He said, "I can't remember the last time I felt at peace. Tonight I did." Miriam's heart clenched. She wanted to deny it, to dismiss his words, but deep inside, she had felt it too. As his car disappeared down the road, she touched the quilt, still warm from where it had lain across both their knees, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. What if love could be found where she least expected it? Would you let yourself open your heart to someone who once wounded you, if they began to show you their brokenness too? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would choose.
The bond that had begun to weave between them was fragile, delicate as a single thread, and like all fragile things, it was destined to be tested. Cassian returned one evening, a storm already etched into his face. His voice was clipped, his posture rigid. Miriam sensed it before he even spoke. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He tossed a folded newspaper onto the table. On the front page was a photograph. Cassian Rourke standing outside her farmhouse. Miriam beside him with her quilt, both caught mid-laughter. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's Unlikely Romance, a charity case or a joke?" Miriam's breath caught, the image blurring. She reached for the paper, hands trembling as she read the biting words beneath. They painted her as nothing more than a spectacle, a novelty to amuse the rich. Her chest tightened painfully. "Is this what I am to you?" she whispered. Cassian's eyes darkened. "No, but that's what they think. Hanley planted this. He wants to humiliate both of us." Her voice cracked. "Both of us? Do you have any idea what it's like to live your whole life as a punchline? To be pointed at, whispered about, laughed at, until I stopped hoping anyone would ever choose me for real?" He stepped closer, desperate. "Miriam," she said bitterly. "Then you came, and you did the same thing. Maybe you regret it now, maybe you don't, but you began with laughter, and now the whole world is laughing with you." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Cassian flinched, the shame he carried rising like bile. His instinct was to defend himself, to hide behind anger. "I never asked for this to happen. I didn't plan." She shook her head, tears stinging. "Exactly. You didn't plan it. You never meant for me to matter." The silence that followed was unbearable. Jonas came down the stairs, catching only fragments of the tension, his gaze sharp. But Miriam turned away, unable to bear the weight of Cassian's presence. "Leave," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Please, just leave." Cassian stood frozen, every muscle in his body rebelling against the command. But her back was turned, her shoulders rigid with hurt. Slowly he stepped toward the door. As it closed behind him, the farmhouse seemed colder, emptier. Miriam clutched the newspaper to her chest, her tears falling onto the ink, smudging the cruel words. Cassian drove away into the night, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. For the first time in years, he had let himself hope, and now he had destroyed the only fragile piece of peace he had found. In the quiet of her room, Miriam stared at her unfinished quilt. The pieces no longer looked like hope. They looked like shreds of something broken beyond repair.
The farmhouse was unbearably quiet. Miriam sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the quilt across her knees. The pattern she had once imagined as a story of waiting now seemed fractured. Her needle lay untouched on the nightstand. Each breath felt heavy, dragged down by the echo of laughter from the world outside. Jonas checked on her often, his concern obvious. "He left, Miriam. You asked him to. Don't let his world poison you." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her. Deep down, she wasn't only hurt by Cassian. She was hurt by the hope she had allowed herself to feel. She had started to believe she might matter, and now that hope seemed crueler than silence. Far away in Portland, Cassian's penthouse was darker than usual. He stood at the window, city lights blazing beneath him, but all he could see was Miriam's tearful face. The newspaper crumpled on his desk taunted him with its headline. Leonie entered cautiously. "You've been like this for days. What happened in Lancaster?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "I broke something I didn't even know I wanted." Leonie studied him, her usual sharpness softened. "Then fix it. If you care, fix it." But the fear pressed in. What if Miriam refused? What if he reached out and she turned away for good? He'd built his empire on control, but in this he had none. Miriam spent her days in silence, stitching without purpose. Nights were harder. She lay awake, hearing his voice, angry, broken, apologetic all at once. She tried to convince herself it didn't matter, that she was better off. But when she whispered prayers, his face rose unbidden. One evening, she walked into the fields alone, the sky heavy with stars. She whispered into the dark, "God, why did you let me hope at all?" Her voice cracked, tears falling hot. She had sworn never to let herself dream of love, yet Cassian had slipped past her defenses only to prove her right. Or had he? The question gnawed at her. Had he meant the cruelty, or was he simply a man still learning how to be kind? Cassian wrestled with the same torment. Alone in his office, he opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph, his late wife, smiling in a way that was all performance. He stared at it, then shoved it away. That life was gone. Miriam's steady defiance haunted him, because it was real. She hadn't wanted his money, she hadn't wanted his name, she had wanted dignity, and he had stripped it away. At last, he made his choice. pride or vulnerability, silence or truth. He booked a flight back to Lancaster, this time with no plan, no smirk, no armor. Just the bare hope that she might still listen. Miriam sat on the porch that evening, the quilt draped over her lap like a shield. The sound of a car rolling down the gravel drive made her heart jolt. She rose as Cassian stepped out, his face stripped of arrogance, his eyes unguarded. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, voice rough. "I don't deserve to stand here, but I couldn't stay away." Her chest tightened, every wound throbbing. "Why are you here, Cassian?" He swallowed hard. "Because you're right. I humiliated you. I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I've spent every day since realizing that you are the only person who ever looked at me and saw more than my money, more than my mistakes, and I can't lose that. I can't lose you." Silence stretched. The only sound was the night wind stirring the cornfields. Miriam's hands trembled around the quilt. Anger warred against longing. Wounds battled against the fragile hope she had buried. She had a choice, to turn him away or to risk believing again. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "If I let you back in, Cassian, you cannot make me small again. You cannot make me a joke." His throat tightened. Never again. The stars burned brighter overhead as they stood in the quiet, both stripped bare, both on the edge of something that could break them or heal them at last.
Cassian stood at the foot of the farmhouse steps, his breath shallow, waiting. Miriam's eyes held him steady, unflinching as always, though her hands clutched the quilt like armor. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of apples from the orchard. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. She turned slowly and stepped inside, leaving the door open. A choice, an invitation, but also a test. Cassian's chest tightened as he climbed the steps and entered, every polished instinct urging him to retreat, but he ignored them. He followed her into the kitchen, where the lamplight cast warm shadows across the wooden walls. Miriam laid the quilt on the table. Her fingers brushed the stitches as if grounding herself. "I've spent my life being laughed at, Cassian, and when you chose me, it was the cruelest echo of every voice I'd already lived with." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "But you've also shown me something I didn't expect. Pieces of yourself no one else sees." Cassian swallowed hard. "I was a coward that night. I thought if I mocked you, it would protect me from caring. But you—" His voice cracked, surprising him. "You saw me anyway. And I can't explain how much that terrifies me." Miriam lifted her eyes to his, tears glistening. "Then don't be terrified. Just be honest." For the first time in years, Cassian let the walls fall completely. He told her everything. The betrayal of his wife, the loneliness that consumed him, the way laughter had become a weapon he used before anyone else could wound him. And as he spoke, his voice faltered, raw and unguarded. Miriam listened without interruption, her hands resting on the quilt as though stitching together the pieces of his story in her heart. When he finished, silence stretched, heavy and holy. She finally reached across the table, her hand covering his. "You don't need armor with me." The touch was gentle, steady. Cassian bowed his head, breath shaking, and for the first time in years, he felt seen, truly seen. Jonas appeared in the doorway, his injured arm bound but his eyes sharp. He studied them both, then gave a faint smile. "I'll take the horse out back. Give you two some quiet." And he slipped away. The night deepened around them. Cassian stood, moving closer. Miriam's breath hitched, but she didn't step back. His hand brushed her cheek, tentative, reverent, as though asking permission. She closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth. When their lips met, it was not fiery passion, but something deeper, healing, fragile, a promise whispered in silence, the kind of kiss that stitched wounds shut, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks, and Cassian remained in Lancaster.
He traded boardrooms for barns, suits for rolled sleeves. The town gossiped, but slowly whispers shifted. They saw the billionaire bending to carry wood, helping with chores, walking beside Miriam at Sunday gatherings. The laughter faded, replaced by quiet respect. One afternoon, Miriam showed him a new quilt she had begun. Its colors were brighter, threads weaving patterns of hope. "What story will this one tell?" Cassian asked. Her smile was soft. Redemption, and love when no one expected it. He touched the fabric, then her hand. "Then let me be part of that story. Not as a joke, not as a headline, but as your husband." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. Months later, when they married in the meadow behind the farmhouse, lanterns glowing and quilts draped like banners, it was simple and unadorned, but more beautiful than any gala. Cassian stood with Miriam beneath the open sky, their vows spoken not with grandeur, but with honesty. No one laughed. No one mocked. The only sound was the chorus of crickets, the rustle of fields, and the quiet awe of love found where it should never have been. Cassian Rourke, once a man who hid behind cruelty, had laid down his armor. Miriam Stoltzfus, once a woman who lived in shadows, stood radiant, chosen not as a joke, but as the love of his life. And when they walked forward hand in hand, it was not into two worlds colliding, but into one they had stitched together, thread by thread, heart by heart. What do you think? Would you have given someone like Cassian a second chance, knowing the pain he caused at first? Or do you believe some wounds can never be healed? Share what you actually think in the comments below. We would love to hear your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you loved this story, you will definitely love the next one. It's more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So go ahead and watch it now. Click on the image on your screen right away to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It helps and encourages us to share the best human interest stories you'd love.